Nice to see you again. Please enjoy today's video.
Psychological analysis. Why do doubts persist?
To understand the Apollo program, it is necessary to consider the international situation and information strategies of the time. The 1960s were the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in fierce competition, not only in military power, but also in scientific and technological capabilities. Space development, in particular, was the front line of an invisible war that symbolized national prestige. With the successful launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957, the Soviet Union took a significant lead in space exploration. Yuri Gagarin's historic spaceflight in 1961 gave the United States a deep sense of crisis. At the time, the American public faced the humiliating reality of falling behind. The Soviet Union in space development. In this context, President Kennedy made a bold declaration to send a human to the moon and return them safely to Earth by the end of the 1960s. However, this declaration was not purely driven by scientific curiosity, but clearly had political and strategic motives. From a psychological perspective, the American public was experiencing cognitive dissonance during this period. They wanted to believe in their country's technological superiority, yet were confronted with the reality of being behind. Then came the success of the Apollo program. Even more intriguing was the media strategy of the time. NASA organized a dedicated public relations team to present the Apollo program as a monumental achievement for humanity. Live broadcasts, press conferences, and the heroic portrayal of astronauts. All of these were designed to deeply appeal to the public's psyche. The success of this information strategy later became a basis for skeptics to point to the sophistication of the presentation. Was it moving because it was true? Or did it appear true because it was movingly presented? Even today, the answer remains ambiguous. The real reason behind the Soviet silence. One of the most frequently raised questions by Apollo skeptics is why the Soviet Union did not challenge the success of the Apollo program. On the surface, this seems to be a weakness in the skepticism. If the Soviet Union, the greatest rival, acknowledged it, then the Apollo program must have been real. However, the actual situation was more complex. Let's consider the state of Soviet space development in 1969. The Soviet lunar rocket N-1 failed in consecutive launches in February and July of that year. The July failure was catastrophic, destroying the launch pad itself. In this situation, news of Apollo 11's success reached the Soviet leadership. For them, it meant admitting technological defeat. Psychologically, the Soviet Union may have employed a mechanism of avoiding cognitive dissonance. By superficially acknowledging the opponent's success, they created an excuse to withdraw from the competition. In fact, the Soviet Union officially cancelled its manned lunar landing program in the early 1970s. They adopted the stance that they were never interested in lunar landings, and that unmanned exploration was sufficient. Another important factor was the international political climate of the time. From the late 1960s to the early 1970s, the US and the Soviet Union were moving toward détente. For the Soviet Union, publicly questioning America's success would have contradicted this political trend. Interestingly, some Soviet scientists and engineers privately harbored doubts about the Apollo program. However, their voices were never made public. Political considerations took precedence over scientific verification. The Soviet Union also had its own intelligence gathering capabilities. Technology to intercept signals from the moon, radar systems to track Apollo spacecraft trajectories. What these data revealed remains classified to this day. Post-Soviet Russia's shift. What is also noteworthy is Russia's attitude after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Since the 1990s, some Russian researchers and former officials have begun to raise questions about the Apollo program. The emergence of these voices after political restrictions were lifted is highly suggestive, a new reality. The structure of truth. Why is the Apollo controversy still debated more than 50 years later? To understand this phenomenon, we must delve into human cognitive psychology. First, there is the psychological mechanism known as confirmation bias. People tend to actively seek information. They want to believe and unconsciously reject information they don't. Those who believe in the Apollo program focus on NASA's official statements and authoritative scientific papers. Those who harbor doubts focus on inconsistencies and puzzling elements. Both sides selectively gather information that reinforces their beliefs. Another modern factor is information overload. With the spread of the internet, people can access all kinds of information. But the more information there is, the more people choose only what aligns with their existing beliefs. This tendency, known as the echo chamber effect, is further amplified by algorithms on social media and YouTube. If someone shows interest in Apollo skepticism, related videos are increasingly recommended. The psychology behind belief. What's psychologically fascinating is the motivation of those who believe in Apollo skepticism. Often, it stems not from pure scientific interest, but from distrust of authority and a longing for hidden truths. In modern society, distrust of governments and large corporations is growing. With issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and economic inequality, more people feel a gap between official announcements and lived experience. This distrust extends to past official narratives, like the Apollo program. Also important is the sense of superiority from possessing special knowledge. The feeling of knowing the truth brings a mystical sense of satisfaction. This sense of superiority is the mysterious fuel that sustains conspiracy theories. Even those who defend the Apollo program are influenced by similar psychology. The desire to maintain an identity rooted in scientific rationality can hinder critical examination of evidence. The most serious problem is that this debate has become a battle of beliefs. It is no longer about verifying scientific facts, but about which narrative is more persuasive. To break this deadlock, we must move away from emotional arguments and return to pure scientific verification. But dismantling belief structures built over more than 50 years is no easy task. We live in an era where the boundaries between information and emotion, fact and belief, are blurred. The Apollo controversy may be a symbolic case of this reality. A new approach to truth, the data returned by Japan's lunar probe, Kaguya, has deepened our understanding while also generating new mysteries. At the same time, it has revealed the limits of human cognition. We tend to see what we want to see and believe what we want to believe. Even scientific facts are interpreted through the filters of our emotions and beliefs. What's important is not seeking black and white answers, but recognizing that truth may lie in the gray areas, the secrets of the moon yet to be revealed. In the coming years, our knowledge of the moon will expand dramatically. NASA's Artemis program, China's manned lunar landing plans, and private lunar exploration missions. If these missions succeed, direct investigation of the Apollo landing sites will become possible. Especially noteworthy is the advancement of high-resolution lunar survey technology, detailed analysis of underground structures, precise examination of soil samples, investigation of electromagnetic anomalies. These findings may shed light on mysteries spanning half a century. And perhaps some may feel that the truth is more complex than imagined. All impressions are valid because there is no absolute answer to this issue. What matters is not blindly accepting information, but continuing to think for ourselves. Even authoritative announcements should be questioned. Even conspiracy theories should be calmly examined. Tonight, the moon quietly shines above us. In its light, we may ask, are humanity's footprints truly etched there? The answer may lie within your own heart.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, and leaving a comment.